So let's move on to configure remote access on the Forefront UAG server. So here we are on our Forefront UAG server. And the first thing we want to do in order to establish our remote access VPN capabilities is open the UAG management console. And under admin, we want to select remote network access. And here you'll see our two flavors of network tunneling. We have standard SSL network tunneling as well as our SSTP network tunneling. Since we need to configure access to support Windows 7 and Windows 8 clients as well as Windows XP, I'm going to go ahead and configure both of these, and then we'll demonstrate how they interoperate together. So first, we'll start off by configuring SSL network tunneling using SSTP. So I'll click that. The first thing we want to do is enable remote access VPN client access on the network tunneling. And the first thing you'll see here is the maximum VPN client connections is set to 0. 0 does not mean unlimited. It actually means literally 0. So we need to specify a positive number between 1 and I think the highest is 16,000. But in our case, we're going to go ahead and establish an upper limit of 100. We're not expecting any more than 100 clients connecting at any one time. So we'll select that. We'll select a trunk for which to assign this to. So the only trunk we have identified here is the portal trunk, so we'll leave it at that. We'll select the Protocols tab, and we'll choose the option to enable SSTP. Now, if this seems a little bit strange, it's because at one time there were some plans to support some other protocols like L2TP over IPsec and PPTP. That never materialized, and so you still have this option to select the protocol. And it's the only protocol, unfortunately, that you have to choose from. So that kind of explains that odd anomaly there. So we'll go over here to address assignment. Here we need to specify how the IP addresses are allocated to our remote VPN client endpoints. You have two choices here. You can assign them manually and from a static IP address pool, or you can assign them using DHCP. In my experience, I tend to find that assigning them from a static address pool just works better. Also, if you're going to configure a multi-server array deployment, you cannot use DHCP. And since in a future lesson we are going to enable network load balancing and create a clustered array, I'm going to plan ahead and choose to assign my addresses using a static address pool. So I'm going to select Add, and we're going to choose the array member here, which is Edge 1. And we're going to assign IP addresses. And again, this has to be a unique subnet, so it cannot be overlapping with any of your internal address range. So my internal address range here at Vintage Surf is 172.16.1.0/24. So I'm going to choose the 172.16.2.0 network. And in this case, I'm going to specify .1 to .254. So the entire subnetted class C of the 172.16 private address range. So we'll choose OK. The next thing we need to do is go to the Advanced tab. And here we're going to specify our DNS servers. My lab here just has a single DNS server, but in a production environment, you would most certainly have more than one, and you can add a secondary DNS server here as well. If your environment includes Win servers, you can include the primary and secondary Win servers here as well. Since I don't have those in my lab, I'm going to leave those as is. So we'll choose OK. And the next thing we want to do is go to this last tab, which is User Groups. We do have the ability to restrict access to SSTP VPN for remote users based on Active Directory user groups. So I could define, for example, only access to the server subnet to domain administrators or something like that. I'm going to go ahead and leave this blank now. I'm going to give access to everyone at this point. But you do have the ability to kind of narrow down that access level. So we'll choose OK. And at this point, we need to go back and, to the admin console here and choose remote access again, and then we're going to configure our parameters for SSL network tunneling. So this is support for our legacy clients, Windows Vista and earlier. So we'll select that. And the first thing we need to do is actually activate SSL network tunneling. So this is a little tricky. This box is down here in the lower left-hand corner. So we'll select that. And of course, that lights up these options, and we can now make some settings changes here. So we're going to use the following connection. This is the external network connection. That's, of course, very important. And then the next thing we want to do is supply some complementary data here. We want to supply the information to the clients for their DNS servers and so forth. So we'll provide our DNS servers, our DNS suffix, and that's the only changes that we need to make there. I don't have any Win servers in my environment. So we'll select the IP provisioning tab. And here we want to use a private IP address range again. And we'll select Add. And here I'm going to supply an IP address range. And this has to be, yet again, another unique address range. We don't want any overlap with the other IP address subnets. And that includes the IP address subnet that we assigned to the SSTP VPN connector. So we'll choose another subnet here. So choose OK. We'll select the Access Control tab. And the Access Control tab allows us to change some of the more fine-grained settings. So by default, split tunneling is enabled. We don't have any problem with that here, so we're going to leave it. But if you have some objections to split tunneling, you certainly can disable that here. And you can also block certain types of traffic over the tunnel by enabling some of these policies. So let's select Additional Networks. Here we want to enable access to the following additional networks. This is somewhat misleading. It sounds like this is in addition to something else that's defined implicitly, and that's not the case. We need to select this button and then choose which network we want this particular SSL network tunneling component to have access to. So here I want to establish access or allow connectivity to my internal subnet. And this is 255.0/24. And how do we handle conflict handling? We're going to say that it's going to disconnect our client if there's any issues there. So you do have some other options as well if the user doesn't have access to those particular subnets. So we'll choose OK. And we'll select the Advanced tab. And here, we're just going to show this to you. We're not going to make any changes, but we could change the listener port, our logging levels, and so forth. And there's some other kind of rather esoteric settings here that may come in handy at some time. There's no real reason to change these defaults unless you're specifically instructed to do so, probably by Microsoft support. But I would say that the defaults are certainly going to be sufficient for you. So once we're done with that, we'll choose OK. Now you're going to receive a couple of warnings here, and so this is just kind of an informational prompt here letting you know that it's actually reserving the broadcast address for the 172.16.3.0 network, and to make sure that you have enough connections. No problem there. We have ample IP addresses in that Class C, so we'll choose OK. Once we've completed that, let's go ahead and go over to our portal, and we need to actually establish a link on the portal so that users can launch their VPN settings. So we'll choose Add and select Next. And here we'll choose the option for a client-server legacy application, and we'll open this drop-down box and scroll all the way down to the bottom and choose Remote Network Access. So we'll choose Next and proceed. Give this a name. Choose Next. We're going to skip the endpoint policies. Again, we're going to approach that in a later lesson in detail. So we're just going to accept the default policies and choose Next. And again, these settings here are the standards. We don't need to make any changes to these, of course. We do have the option to start this connection automatically when the user logs in. But sometimes there are times when you want to make it easier on your user just to establish this connection automatically. We don't have that requirement here, so we're not going to select that option. Choose Next. And this, of course, is the standard dialog box to change the settings and the appearance of the link on the actual portal. I'm going to go ahead and accept the defaults. Choose Next. Authorize all users, of course, and again, we've talked about this in a number of previous lessons. It doesn't mean all authenticated users. It just simply means I may add some further restrictions about who can see that link in their portal. I'm fine with it the way it is, so I'm going to choose Next, and we'll choose Finish. And once again, we will save the configuration and activate. So activation has been completed successfully. I'll choose Finish. And once again, we'll wait for TMG to complete its synchronization. And activation has been completed successfully, so that's excellent.